We are in Hebrews 11, verse 32. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. That's amazing to think of all those things that men, women of faith that God used. And he's, time will fail if I talked about Gideon and Barak and all these people. And tonight we wanted to focus on Samson. We focused on Gideon last time and really just kind of scratched the surface on Gideon. And tonight it's Samson. And so, why is Samson in the Hall of Faith? If you say Samson, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Delilah. Samson and Delilah. It's like a pair. Like you'd think that they were married and like Sonny and Cher, or like, I don't know what a common couple. Peanut butter and jelly, something like that. Okay. But here's the deal. Delilah was only like the very end of Samson's life. He had a 20-year career as a judge, as a leader in Israel. And so we think, but he's known for his failure. The challenging thing is when we look at in the book of Judges, there's 3 chapters on Samson, and none of the 3 chapters does he look good. It's kind of like, Lord, why is he in the Hall of Faith? Because he's just a man of the flesh. He's the man that's always, one pastor I know, he says that he was a he-man with a she-weakness. And that's what he was always after. Every chapter, that's what he's after. And that's really what brings the ruin of his life, of course. So how is he in the Hall of Faith? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we were talking with some of the guys beforehand, and it was like, well, part of how he could be in the Hall of Faith is because of his mother, who honored what the Lord said, the angel of the Lord that appeared to him, and said that he should be a Nazirite. Okay, now Nazirite is different than being from Nazareth, okay? If you're from Nazareth, what are you called? Nazarene, okay? So Jesus was a Nazarene, not a Nazirite. A Nazirite was a special vow, a special dedication to the Lord. It's referred to in Numbers chapter 6, and there are 3 things that a Nazirite could not do. What are those 3 things? Couldn't cut the hair. No drinking. Specifically, no grapes. Not even supposed to touch grapes. Raisins were forbidden for the Nazirite, okay? So no grapes, which would then include no wine, no alcohol, and no grapes. No cutting the hair. And the third thing? Dead person, all right? No horror movies, okay? Basically, you're not supposed to touch anything that's dead. Those are the 3 commitments of a Nazirite. Now, that's fascinating when you think about Samson, because what did Samson do? He killed a lot of people. He killed a lot of Philistines specifically, thousands of Philistines. And yet, he's in the Hall of Faith. Well, fascinating when you look at it, his 20-year career, okay, so he becomes of age and he gets married, and then basically he judges Israel for 20 years. So let's say he's at least 35 or 40 at his demise when he dies. So for 40 years, he never cuts his hair. I mean, this guy's got some serious dreads, and that's what we're talking about. There was a commitment that he made. So why did he do that? Well, that was part of his faith. But as we look at the scriptures, let's dive a little bit closer. So no grapes, no dead things, and no cutting hair. Now with that in mind, let's read through Judges 14, verse 1. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now, get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she's right in my eyes. These are the first words we hear spoken by Samson. Totally, all he is focused on, she is like, And that's all he's thinking about. That's all he wants. And so he looks at them, and remember, they were commanded not to marry outside of their nation, because the fear was that these foreign women would pull you into their false gods. So first of all, he's breaking one of the commandments. And that was the other thing that we forget. The Nazirite vow was those three, but then he was supposed to be he was commanded to follow the commandments of Israel. And so he's breaking one of them right here at the beginning. He wants a pagan wife. So, verse 4, his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. It's not that God wanted Samson to sin, but God knew it was going to happen, and God was going to use it for his purposes. God doesn't waste anything. Okay? Remember what Jesus, when they fed the 5,000, what did Jesus tell them? Pick up the leftover pieces, that nothing be wasted. Your pain, your suffering, your trials, whether self-inflicted or not, God is not going to waste them. He's not going to waste them. He doesn't waste anything. And so even though his parents are like, oh, hey, not my son. This is my son who we've raised for 20 years. He's never cut his hair. We've never done anything. He's never crossed the line. And yet here he is. He's intentionally crossing the line, and they don't understand. So verse 5, then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. Now, it says that he went down with him. We're not quite sure. In that day, the marriages were arranged, so it's likely that the parents went on ahead of him. And so he's coming down, and what's the first thing is, of course, we focus on the lion, but we miss there's one other thing. Where is the lion? In a vineyard. Is that a problem? For a guy that's not supposed to touch grapes, that's a problem. Right from the beginning, here is Samson, and he's tipping up right up to the line that he's not supposed to go up across. And he's like got his toe across the line. He's in the vineyard. And then in the vineyard, of course, he sees this lion, and it's fascinating to think, a lion has sharp teeth. He grabs it by the mouth, by the teeth, and rips it apart. That's like pretty serious, okay? And so he does this, and yet he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. Now, if you just ripped apart the jaws of a lion, what would you do? I mean, like, what would I do? It was like, the lion was like this, and no, you'd want to tell everybody what just happened. And yet Samson is like, he knows. He crossed the line. He wasn't supposed to be doing this. Verse 7, and then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. Once again, it's all about what he sees. Verse 8, and after some days, he returned to take her. And he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on eating as he went. And he came to his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. Once again, here he is. Now we forget. Carcass, what is that? It's a dead thing, and he's here. He's crossed the line, and we have to remember that you're in the wilderness. They don't have Dunkin' Donuts. This was better than Dunkin', so he's going in. He swoops it up. He's like, this honey, great stuff. And he's like, I gotta give some to mom and dad. So he's like, whatever container he has, he's stuffing it away, and he's walking away. And he's, hey, mom and dad, look at this honey. Where'd you get it? Oh, I just found it on the road. Hiding, covering. That's what we do when we sin. We got to cover it up because we can't let anybody know what's going on. Now, what happens in Samson's life as he goes on, the marriage just is a disaster. If you know the story, he has the riddle about the honey and the lion, and then he's deceived by his new wife, and she tells the story to the people, and as a result, he loses a bet. Samson doesn't like to lose. He loses the bet. Goes, kills 30 guys to fulfill the debt, and comes back and gives them. The Philistines are like, this guy's kind of crazy. And Samson then leaves. He leaves his wife and goes back home. He's so frustrated with her because she nagged him to give him the answer to the riddle. And finally, he decides he's going to come back. And so he comes back and he basically wants to sleep with her. And he gets there and they're like, oh, you left. So we gave her to the best man at your wedding. And he is livid. The father of the bride is like, but you know what? My younger daughter, she looks even hotter than the other wife. And so take her. And Samson doesn't care. He's upset and he basically goes and slaughters a bunch of them. Then the next chapter, he slaughters a bunch of the Philistines. And he's always funny, the story of the jawbone of the donkey. And he takes the jawbone of the donkey and kills 1,000 Philistines. Over and over again, he's doing it. But I want you to think about it. That jawbone of the donkey, it's a dead thing. Once again, Samson, he's crossed the line and nothing happened. So he crosses the line again and nothing happens. So I guess I don't have to worry about that dead thing rule. I guess I don't have to worry about the grape rule. And he's getting so comfortable, and there's so much pride and arrogance that is just growing here in Samson. Well, skipping ahead towards the end of his life, there's a story that he goes into the town and he's there late at night, and they hear that he's in there, and they're trying to arrest him. And he basically wakes up in the morning and just basically lifts up the gate off of its hinges and throws it off and walks out. And everybody's like, oh, this guy. Now, the fascinating thing about this guy, everybody thinks about Samson, and when they think about Samson, they're probably thinking about a guy kind of like this picture, okay? When you have in your head Samson, that's usually what you think of. You think of a guy that is like, yeah. But remember, in the story with Delilah, they said, tell us, what's the source of your great strength? He didn't look like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. He didn't. I mean, I don't even know how that guy's human. That's like, it's like balloons that they put, I mean, that's crazy. But if you saw that, you'd like, well, he's strong because he's obviously strong. But Samson didn't look like that. Samson was powerful because the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. You can pull that off lest we stumble anybody, okay? So the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. He walks in faith. He walks in faith believing that God is going to show up. That's why he's partly in the hall of faith, because God shows up. Because he's walking in that kind of... Now, part of that faith, you begin, as you read the whole story of Samson, you wonder if it's part of that faith is in him. But the faith is not in his muscles because they don't know the source of his... He looks normal. He looks normal. He looks average. And that's why, Delilah's like, well, tell me the source of your strength. And of course, 3 times he says it's this, and he says it's this. The first thing he says, it's, well, if you bind me with fresh ropes, and of course that doesn't work. He's just pops them. The second thing she says, if you really loved me, you'd tell me the source of your strength. And he's flirting with the line. He says, well, if you weave my hair into a loom and just weave it in there, then I would be powerless. If you put it in it, put a pin in it, it's kind of like, tie it in a knot, I'd be powerless. And of course she does. And of course he just breaks out with no problem. And then the third time she asks, if you really love, now you've humiliated me. And it's just so crazy because he's so led by his lust, he doesn't see. Lust blinds. Now I want you to think about that. Here's a guy that is totally led by the lust of his eyes. Do you know what happens to him? The eyes get gouged out. When they finally do take him, he tells her that, well, if you cut my hair, then I would be as weak as any other man. Now, how does he know this? Well, because that was his Nazirite vow, and it was part of the Spirit of the Lord, I guess, telling him, but it's really that he knew that that's the one area that he had not crossed yet. And he gives it away, and of course she binds him, cuts his hair, and then he is weak and powerless. The Philistines, Judges 16, verse 21, the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison, but the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. There's this essence. Now, pride had puffed up in Samson, and then he gets humbled. He is totally humble. His eyes are gouged out. He's a slave, and basically he's just grinding at the mill. And they would have they have a big stone, and they would usually have a couple guys that would push that, and that would grind. That would go over the grain and and crush it and begin to, create flour or whatever type of thing that they needed to create. So here he is. His eyes are gouged out. The man that was led by his eyes has his eyes gouged out. Jesus said, if your right eye offends you, pluck it out. That's pretty scary to think. Sometimes the Lord loves you enough to put you in the penalty box of the thing that's destroying you. That's what happened to Samson. The lust of the eyes were destroying him. And God said, well, you're not trusting in me. You're not walking by faith. You're walking by sight. Let me help you walk by faith. That was a tough message. And so Samson here, we don't know how long this is, but he's basically serving there. His hair is starting to grow back. Verse 23, now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. There's a huge celebration. Samson has killed thousands of Philistines, barehanded. This guy, and that they were afraid of. Remember, the Philistines had been ruling over the Israelites and oppressing the Israelites. And now Samson, for 20 years, has been ruling over the Philistines. So they're excited. They're throwing a party. Verse 25, and when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, remember, he's being led by the hand because he can't see where he's going, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained. Basically, this is this kind of almost like a big, not quite Colosseum, but it's a big palace, and people are up on top, and he's got these pillars, and it's set up in such a way, you know what's going to happen. Verse 28, Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on one and his left on the other. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. This is a fascinating thing. So he's been humbled, and in that humility, there's still a little bit of arrogance. Let me be avenged for my eyes, instead of, Lord, for what this disgrace that I placed upon you. He still hasn't owned his own sin. And yet God still uses him because God will accomplish everything according to his purpose, right? So he pushes the pillars that causes the whole thing to fall. Samson dies, 3,000 people die. It's not just 3,000 people, it's 3,000 leaders. So in some ways, this was a huge impact on the Philistines and their army, because it's kind of like literally having, going into the Capitol, and there's the State of the Union and, blowing up the Capitol. Basically, that's kind of what happened. All of the leaders die at that time. I love this quote from John Owens, a Puritan reformer. The custom of sinning takes away the sense of it. The course of the world takes away the shame of it. In other words, the more we sin, the more we're numb to its effects. And this world takes away the shame. There is no shame. Today especially. There is no shame. So, we are called. We hear the story, and we're called to live holy. We're called to be a holy people, a holy nation, a holy priesthood. Proverbs 5:22, an evil man is held captive by his own sins. They are ropes that catch and hold him. He will die for lack of self-control. He will be lost because of his great foolishness. That describes Samson. That's described so many. That's described many leaders, politicians, and even pastors. Led astray because we cross the line. We come up to the line, and it's like, well, there's the line. And then we step a little bit closer. And then a little bit closer. And then, oh. What? I didn't get struck by lightning. Maybe nobody knows. Maybe nobody cares. Maybe it's no big deal. And then we begin this descent into sin and compromise. We don't intend to compromise. We don't start out and say, I want to sin today. No, it's subtle. And we just we get toyed, we get tempted, and just to look at that line, and whether that's with anger, whether that's with sexual sin, whether that's with control issues. There's a lot of areas where self-control, where we lack self-control, like Samson. So, my question for you, and that we're going to go into the groups with, there's a couple different questions. That area, first of all, of our fleshly desires. How often are you led by your fleshly desires? How often I'm self-controlled. I'm being led by my self-control, and my self-control, I've been working on my self-control, and I've got great self-control. Do you know that self-control is a limited quantity? You know, you can, the scientific studies are, you can grow in self-control, and have more self-control, but it's still limited. There comes a point where you are exhausted of self-control, and what happens is you can't handle it anymore. You break, you lose it, you get angry, you give into temptation, whatever the situation is. You only have so much self-control. That's why, you know, I saw there was a show that, you know, keeping people up for 24 hours, and then they have them do all these different things because you're testing the boundaries of what you can do. The same thing is true with your self-control. The same thing is true with our lives. Are we relying on self-control to get us through? Are we relying on the Holy Spirit? Are we relying on our senses and whatever I see, I want to do? We live in a world today that says, do what feels good, whatever feels right. There's a lot of things that feel right that are way wrong. And so that's what I want us to, as we break into groups, to be thinking about and asking the Lord to give revelation. What am I being led by? My senses, my self-control, or his Spirit?